These are officials from Holcim, the world's largest cement firm, leaving a Swiss court currently trying to determine whether to consider a climate case brought against it by Indonesians. Residents of the tiny Indonesian island of Pari, threatened with disappearance by rising sea levels driven by climate change, have come to Switzerland to demand compensation from Holcim. The case, the first of its kind against the cement behemoth, is part of a wider international movement seeking to assign responsibility to major companies for the climate damage hurting the livelihoods of millions of people, especially in the global south.
Sangat rada emosi kayak gitunya ketika mendengarkan dari pihak Holcim.
Before the hearing at the court in Switzerland's Zug, Holcim maintained that the question of who is allowed to emit how much CO2 should be a matter for the legislature and not a question for a civil court. But it later said that it awaits the court's decision, insisting that it was fully committed to reaching net zero by 2050, with sustainability at the core. Oil companies have typically been the biggest targets, but climate activists and the Indonesian plaintiffs are hoping the suit against Holcim will highlight the role of a lesser-known but highly polluting industry, which is responsible for around 8% of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere each year. But the struggle against a multi-million-dollar company is not easy.
Mereka orang besarnya, sedangkan kita orang kecil dianggapnya kita miskin banget kayak gitunya, makanya sempat kesel tadi pengen ke Pari.
Environmentalists say cement production is responsible for around 8% of global CO2 emissions and allege Holcim figures among the 100 largest CO2 emitters among all companies worldwide. The company thus bears significant responsibility for climate-related loss and damages. The suit maintains, in a case that could be a milestone for plaintiffs from developing countries who take on industrial giants. The company has not owned any cement plants in Indonesia since 2019, but the plaintiffs maintain it shares responsibility for rising temperatures and thus rising sea levels.
Komunitas semua yang berdampak iklim, mereka berani menyuarakan tentang keadilan iklim ini gitunya, Bang. Biar kita yang tidak pernah merusak alam kita bukan kita yang melakukan, enak banget perusahaan besar tidak pernah peduli dengan keadaan kita. Harus semangat semua masyarakat atau kawan-kawan yang ada di manapun harus tetap memperjuangkan keadilan iklim ini.
11% of the 42-hectare island of Pari has already disappeared in recent years, and it could be completely underwater by 2050 due to rising sea levels, according to environmentalists. The islanders say saltwater floods have in recent years surged in scale and frequency, battering homes and damaging livelihoods. Swiss Church Aid, an NGO helping the islanders, stressed that the amount was only equivalent to 0.42% of the actual costs, in line with estimates that Holcim is responsible for 0.42% of global industrial CO2 emissions since 1750. But the response from Holcim officials was nothing short of demeaning and disregarding the survival needs of the islanders, who represent many others facing a similar fate worldwide.
Alors d'abord, une déception que la justice suisse soit si lente. Après 3 ans de procédure, il y a une première audience et toujours pas de décision. Et aussi une grande déception quant à l'attitude des représentants de Holcim, qui était très condescendante et qui, notamment quand il a déposé 4 francs sur la table, voici la compensation pour vos dommages sur cette île.
The 4 plaintiffs are seeking around $4,500 each from Holcim for damages and for protection measures, such as planting mangroves and constructing breakwater barrier, a value much insignificant in comparison to the extent of the damages they face due to climate change. The alleged gesture of placing 4 Swiss francs by Holcim representatives is seen as an insult to the agony of the Indonesian plaintiffs. In addition to the compensation, the plaintiffs are demanding a 43% reduction in Holcim's greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and a 69% reduction by 2040.
Effectivement, le contraste est énorme entre cette île qui est en train de disparaître et la richesse que l'on a ici à Zug. Il faut savoir que cette richesse, elle vient de grosses multinationales comme Holcim et que ces grosses multinationales, y compris Holcim, n'ont jamais payé un seul franc en dédommagement climatique. Et c'est justement ce que les plaignants viennent maintenant demander. C'est justement cette somme de 14 000 francs qu'ils demandent qui correspond à moins de 1 heure de salaire du président du conseil d'administration de Holcim.
The case against Holcim illustrates the new face of the climate fight as activists use the courts, rather than rely on political action, in the fight against global warming. If accepted, it could be a milestone for plaintiffs from developing countries who take on industrial giants. While the case is the first such filed by Indonesians against a foreign company for climate-related damage, it is also the first instance of a Swiss company being sued for its alleged role in such damage.
I think that company-related climate cases are coming up in every jurisdiction, in every country now. There are many, many countries that have them, not just Germany. There's also Italy, Belgium, France, the US. So I really don't know if it's even relevant, whether it's in Zug or whether it's, in my case, in Braunschweig or in wherever. What happens is that companies feel that they have a responsibility and that people are prepared to go to court for it. If there is a precedent, what happens first is that they have to accept there is a responsibility. And that, I think, will mostly shift investment strategies. It will also affect company values, of course. So they're rightly, comparing this to a new law, because yes, this really means you have to be earnest in reducing CO2 emissions, and at some point you will have to stop CO2 emissions. That is simply the truth. So I believe that these cases can have a very big impact on companies, yes.
Apart from losing their homes and their hometowns, Indonesian islanders face a consistent struggle for survival. The islanders describe how severe flooding of Star Beach had shrunk the pristine stretch of sand by 9 meters since 2021, driving away tourists vital for their income. At the same time, tidal floods now regularly reach their bamboo houses, rotting the walls and contaminating their wells, forcing them to purchase drinking water for their families at high prices. Some say the small workshops where mechanical repairs are done are repeatedly flooded, rusting the equipment within. If the Swiss court refuses to take the case, the residents of Pari would lose their beach, their island, and, as some residents put it, even their lives.